The letter arrived on a day when dust had painted the horizon red, and even the most hardened souls in Sweetwater Creek sought shelter from the relentless heat. Cassidy Sullivan stood on the weathered porch of the town's only hotel, her knuckles white around the envelope that had carried her across 1,500 miles of American wilderness. The year was 1875, and the promise of a new life beckoned from this rough, edged corner of Wyoming territory. Her journey from Boston had been fraught with delay and danger, but the words sealed within the envelope had sustained her. A promise of marriage, written in an elegant hand by a man she'd never met, a man who needed a wife to help claim his homestead under the terms of the Homestead Act. "Excuse me," she called to a passing cowhand. "Could you direct me to the Nightingale Ranch? I'm looking for Mr. Benjamin Nightingale." The cowhand, no more than 20, looked her up and down with undisguised curiosity. Her traveling dress, once fashionable in Boston, now seemed ridiculously impractical against the backdrop of the frontier town. "Ben Nightingale," the young man squinted. "Madam, that's a good 15 miles northwest. You planning to walk there?" "I had hoped to hire transport," Cassidy replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite her exhaustion. The cowhand gestured toward the saloon across the dusty street. "You might find Hank inside with his wagon. He runs supplies out to the ranches twice a week." Cassidy nodded her thanks and squared her shoulders. The journey had depleted nearly all her funds, but she had come too far to falter now. The letter in her hand was her future, a contract, really, between herself and a stranger who needed a wife as much as she needed a new beginning. The saloon doors swung open before she could cross the street, and a tall man emerged, his presence commanding immediate attention. He moved with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in this harsh landscape. His face was partially shadowed by a well-worn hat, but she could see a strong jaw dusted with several days' worth of stubble. As he descended the steps, his gaze locked with hers, and Cassidy felt a strange flutter in her chest. There was something penetrating in his blue eyes, as though he could read the desperation that had driven her west. "Looking for someone, miss?" His voice was deep, tinged with the same roughness that characterized everything in this territory. "I'm seeking transport to the Nightingale Ranch," she replied, lifting her chin slightly. The man stilled and his eyes narrowed. "What business do you have with Ben Nightingale?" Cassidy hesitated. She hadn't expected to announce her arrangement to the entire town. But there was no shame in what she had agreed to. Practical marriages were common, especially here in the West. "I have a letter," she said, holding up the envelope. "Mr. Nightingale and I have an arrangement." "An arrangement," he repeated, his expression unreadable. "Yes. He advertised for a bride in the Boston Herald. We've corresponded and he's expecting me." She smoothed her skirts, suddenly self-conscious under his scrutiny. "Are you acquainted with Mr. Nightingale?" A flicker of something amusement, irritation crossed his face. "You could say that." He removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. "I'm Benjamin Nightingale." The declaration struck Cassidy like a physical blow. This man bore little resemblance to the refined gentleman she had imagined based on his elegantly penned letters. "You're Benjamin Nightingale," she couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. "In the flesh." He studied her with new interest. "And you would be Cassidy Sullivan, from Boston." She extended her hand, then awkwardly withdrew it when he made no move to take it. Instead, she thrust the envelope toward him. "I have your letter of promise." Benjamin's brow furrowed. He glanced at the envelope but didn't take it. "Letter of promise." "Yes." "You wrote that upon my arrival, we would be married by the local minister, and I would assist in managing your homestead to fulfill the requirements of your land claim." The certainty in her voice wavered as confusion clouded his features. "You did write this, didn't you?" Benjamin's expression darkened. "Miss Sullivan, I think we'd better talk, not here." He looked around at the curious onlookers beginning to gather. "My wagon's hitched behind the mercantile. Gather your things and I'll take you to my ranch. We can sort this out there." Cassidy hesitated. The man before her was a stranger, despite the letters she'd treasured for months. Yet she had nowhere else to go, and if there had been some misunderstanding, it was best resolved in private. Very well, Mr. Nightingale. Within half an hour, they were headed northwest out of Sweetwater Creek. The wagon jolted over the uneven terrain, and Cassidy gripped the wooden seat to keep from being thrown off. Beside her, Benjamin Nightingale drove in silence, his profile stern against the vast Wyoming landscape. "Your letters didn't mention how beautiful this country is," she ventured, desperate to break the tension. Benjamin glanced at her. "Miss Sullivan, I need to be clear about something. I never wrote to you, I never advertised for a bride, and until 5 minutes ago I'd never heard your name." The words landed like stones in her stomach. "But that's impossible. I have the letters signed with your name. You described your ranch, your hopes for building a proper house, the need for a partner to help secure your land claim." "Someone's been using my name," his voice was hard. "And they've brought you 1,500 miles on a fool's errand." Cassidy's mind raced. Who would do such a thing, and why? There must be some mistake. The letter directed me to Benjamin Nightingale of Sweetwater Creek, Wyoming Territory. No mistake. "I am the only Benjamin Nightingale in these parts." He hesitated, then asked, "Did you send money to secure the arrangement?" Heat rushed to her face. $25 to help prepare for my arrival." Benjamin muttered a curse under his breath. "You've been swindled, Miss Sullivan." It's an old trick target Eastern women looking for a fresh start, promise marriage and land, collect what money you can, and disappear. The scoundrel probably assumed you'd never make the journey, or if you did, you'd have no recourse when you found out the truth. Cassidy felt the world tilting beneath her. All her plans, her hopes based on a lie. She had sold everything she owned to make this journey. There was no home to return to, no family awaiting her. Her parents had died in a fire 2 years earlier, leaving her with nothing but debts and memories. "What will I do?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Benjamin's expression softened slightly. "First, you'll come to my ranch for the night. It's too late to turn back to town, and I won't leave you stranded. Tomorrow we'll figure things out." As the wagon crested a hill, a small valley opened before them. A creek wound through the center, its banks lined with cottonwoods. On a gentle rise stood a sturdy log cabin with a covered porch. Nearby, a barn and corral completed the modest homestead. "This is it," Benjamin said. "Not much compared to Boston, I expect. It's exactly as the letters described," Cassidy murmured. Benjamin frowned. "Whoever wrote to you must know me, or at least know of my place." He helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and sure around her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, despite her distress. The inside of the cabin was simple but well kept. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall. A wooden table with 4 chairs sat in the center, and a curtained alcove presumably contained a bed. Shelves held books more than she would have expected and various necessities of frontier life. "I'll sleep in the barn," Benjamin said, setting her carpet bag down. "You can take the cabin." "That's not necessary, it is." His tone left no room for argument. "There's stew on the stove." "Help yourself, I need to see to the horses." Left alone, Cassidy sank onto a chair, trembling with exhaustion and shock. The letter that had guided her west now mocked her from her pocket. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. Crying would solve nothing. She had come west for a new beginning. The circumstances had changed drastically, but her determination had not. She would find a way forward. By the time Benjamin returned, she had composed herself and laid out 2 bowls of stew on the table. "I hope you don't mind," she said. "I thought you might be hungry as well." He seemed surprised by the gesture but sat down across from her. "Thank you." They ate in silence for several minutes before Cassidy spoke. "Mr. Nightingale, I want to apologize for the intrusion. I should have been more cautious." "Call me Ben," he replied, "and you're not the first to be taken in by such schemes. These con men know exactly what to promise, exactly what to say. Still, I feel foolish." "Don't." His eyes met hers across the table. "Hope isn't foolish, Miss Sullivan, misplaced sometimes, but never foolish." "Cassidy, please." She managed a small smile. "If I'm to call you Ben, you should use my given name." Ben studied her for a moment. "Cassidy, then, tell me about these letters." She retrieved them from her bag, 5 in total, spanning 3 months of correspondence. Ben read them carefully, his frown deepening with each page. "These details," he said finally. About the creek running through my property, the south-facing slope where I'm planning to build the main house, even the stand of pines I mentioned wanting to harvest for lumber. This is someone who knows my land and my plans. Who would do such a thing? Ben sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. I have my suspicions. There's a man in town, Raymond Walsh. He used to work for me until I caught him stealing. He's been looking for ways to get back at me ever since. But why involve me, a stranger from Boston? Because it would cause trouble, because he thought it would embarrass me or burden me. Ben's jaw tightened. Or because he thought I'd turn you away and he'd be waiting to offer his assistance to a vulnerable woman. The implications sent a chill through Cassidy. I see, but he miscalculated, Ben continued, because I'm not going to turn you away to fend for yourself. That's very kind, but I can't impose. It's not about kindness, it's about what's right. Ben leaned forward. Listen, the situation isn't ideal, but it might not be hopeless either. The truth is, I do need help around here, and I do need to prove up on my homestead claim, which means showing improvements and continuous residence. A partnership of some kind might benefit us both. Cassidy blinked in surprise. What exactly are you proposing? Not marriage, he clarified quickly. But a business arrangement. You stay here, help with the place, I'll pay you fair wages. You can save up, decide what you want to do next. Meanwhile, you'll have a roof over your head and honest work. Why would you do that for a stranger? Ben's gaze was steady. Because someone used my name to hurt you, that makes it my problem too. Cassidy considered his offer. It wasn't what she had traveled west for, but it was a chance to get her bearings, to earn money while deciding her next move. And something about Ben Nightingale, his straightforward manner, the integrity evident in his eyes, made her inclined to trust him. What would these duties include? Cooking, keeping the cabin in order, help with the garden come spring, maybe looking over my accounts. I suspect you have more schooling than I do. I taught school in Boston, she admitted. Before what? Cassidy hesitated. She had kept her past carefully guarded, but something about this man made her want to speak the truth. Before the fire that killed my parents and destroyed our home, the debts were substantial. Teaching didn't pay enough to cover them. When I saw the advertisement, it seemed like providence. Ben's expression softened. I'm sorry about your parents. It was 2 years ago. She straightened her shoulders. Mr. Nightingale, Ben, I accept your offer, temporarily, until I can determine my next steps. Good. He stood and gathered their empty bowls. We'll ride into town tomorrow. I want to have a word with Raymond Walsh, and we should let Sheriff Miller know about this scheme. You might not be the only victim. That night, lying in Ben's bed while he slept in the barn, Cassidy stared at the log ceiling and considered her situation. The letter of promise that had brought her west had proven false, but perhaps there was still a chance for the new beginning she sought. Not as Benjamin Nightingale's mail-order bride, but as her own woman, making her own way, morning brought clarity and purpose. Cassidy rose early and set about preparing breakfast. By the time Ben entered the cabin, she had coffee brewing and biscuits in the oven. You didn't have to do that, he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. Consider it the start of our arrangement, she replied. I believe in earning my keep. Ben's mouth quirked into a half-smile, the first she'd seen from him. Fair enough. The ride to town was easier in daylight. Cassidy took the opportunity to observe the landscape, more carefully the rolling hills dotted with sagebrush, the distant mountains with their snow-capped peaks. It was wild country, so different from the crowded streets of Boston, but there was a beauty in its vastness that stirred something in her soul. Tell me about your ranch, she said as they rode. How long have you been here? 3 years. Came west after the war. Worked as a ranch hand for a while, saved every penny. Filed my homestead claim 2 years ago. You fought in the war, Ben nodded, his expression closing slightly. Union cavalry, don't much like to talk about it. I understand. She respected the boundaries of his privacy. Many men had returned from the conflict changed, carrying burdens invisible to the eye. And your family? Parents died when I was young, raised by my uncle in Pennsylvania. He passed a few years back. Ben glanced at her. What about you? Any family besides your parents? No, it was just us. Cassidy smoothed her skirts. My father was a professor at Harvard, my mother taught piano. They believed in education for women, quite progressive for their time. I was fortunate. Ben considered this. Smart then, good with figures and such, yes, and languages. I speak French and a little German. Useful skills in Boston, less so here, perhaps, but I'm adaptable. She met his gaze steadily and determined. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. I believe you are. Sweetwater Creek looked different in the morning light, less intimidating, though no less rough around the edges. Ben tied the wagon outside the sheriff's office and helped Cassidy down. Let me do the talking, he said as they entered. Sheriff Miller was a weathered man in his 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened attentively as Ben explained the situation, occasionally glancing at Cassidy with a mixture of sympathy and assessment. Not the first time I've heard of such schemes, Miller said when Ben finished. But it's the first time someone's been bold enough to impersonate a local. He turned to Cassidy. Do you still have the original advertisement from the newspaper? She reached into her reticule and produced the carefully preserved clipping. The sheriff examined it, then handed it to Ben. Looks legitimate, Miller conceded. Professional work, and you're sure it was Walsh? Who else knows the details of my property and my plans? Ben countered. And who has more reason to want to cause me trouble? The sheriff sighed. I'll have a talk with him. But without proof, there's not much I can do officially. I understand. I just want him to know I'm aware of what he's done. And what about you, Miss Sullivan? Sheriff Miller asked. What are your plans now? Mr. Nightingale has offered me employment while I decide my next steps, she replied calmly. The sheriff's eyebrows rose and he gave Ben a questioning look. Temporary arrangement, Ben clarified, until Miss Sullivan can establish herself or decide to move on. I see. The sheriff's tone suggested he saw perhaps more than either of them intended. Well, Miss Sullivan, Sweetwater Creek could use more educated folks. If you decide to stay, the town might interest you in taking up teaching again. Our current schoolmistress is expecting, and her husband's talking of moving them back east before winter. The prospect kindled unexpected interest in Cassidy. I would certainly consider it, Sheriff, thank you. As they left the sheriff's office, Ben suggested they visit the mercantile. You'll need some practical things if you're staying at the ranch. Proper boots, for one thing. Cassidy glanced down at her city shoes, already showing signs of wear from just one day in Wyoming. Yes, I suppose I will. The mercantile was well stocked for a frontier establishment. While Ben spoke with the proprietor about an order of supplies, Cassidy explored the shelves, selecting a few necessities: sturdy boots, work gloves, a heavy shawl for the coming autumn. Add it to my account, George, Ben told the shopkeeper when she brought her items to the counter. That's not necessary, Cassidy protested. I can pay for my own things. Consider it an advance on your wages. Ben's tone was matter of fact. You can pay me back as you earn it. Before she could respond, the door opened and a well-dressed man entered. He stopped short at the sight of Ben, his expression shifting from surprise to calculated amusement. Nightingale, he said, his voice smooth as oil. Didn't expect to see you in town today. Ben turned slowly. Walsh. Raymond Walsh was perhaps 40, with the polished appearance of someone who considered himself above his surroundings. His clothes were fine, if somewhat flashy, and his smile never reached his cold eyes. And who might this lovely lady be? Walsh asked, gaze sliding to Cassidy. Miss Sullivan, Ben said, stepping slightly in front of her. From Boston, understanding dawned on Walsh's face, quickly masked by exaggerated courtesy. Ah, Miss Sullivan, welcome to Sweetwater Creek. I trust your journey was comfortable. The deliberate emphasis on her name confirmed Ben's suspicions. This was the man who had lured her west under false pretenses. Mr. Walsh, Cassidy said evenly, stepping around Ben. How interesting that you seem to know of me when we've never been introduced. Walsh's smile faltered momentarily. News travels fast in a small town, my dear. Indeed, especially when facilitated by dishonest men. She held his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. I wonder, did you expect me to arrive destitute and desperate? Were you waiting to offer your assistance when I discovered your deception? Walsh's facade cracked, revealing a flash of anger. I don't know what you're implying. She's not implying anything, Ben interrupted. She's stating facts. You used my name to lure her here, thinking it would cause problems for me and create an opportunity for you. Prove it, Walsh challenged, his earlier charm evaporating. I don't need to prove it to know it's true. Ben stepped closer. Stay away from Miss Sullivan. Stay away from my property. And if I hear of any more letters bearing my name, you'll answer to more than just the sheriff. Walsh's eyes narrowed. Careful, Nightingale. Threats can go both ways. That wasn't a threat, it was a promise. Ben placed his hand on Cassidy's back, gently guiding her toward the door. Let's go. Outside, Cassidy released a shaky breath. So that's Raymond Walsh. That's him. Ben's jaw was tight with anger. He'll think twice before trying something like this again, but he's not a man to underestimate. Until we know for certain he's done with his schemes, you should be careful. I can handle men like Raymond Walsh, Cassidy assured him. I taught school in Boston, remember? Some of the fathers were cut from similar cloth, all charm on the surface, all self-interest underneath. Ben studied her with new appreciation. You're not what I expected when you stepped off that stage, Miss Sullivan. No, she smiled slightly. What did you expect? Someone more breakable? Life has a way of strengthening those who survive it, she said simply. As they prepared to return to the ranch, a commotion near the bank caught their attention. A woman was arguing loudly with a man who appeared to be the banker. That's Clara Wilson, Ben explained. Her husband died last winter. Left her with 3 children and a small ranch that's been in his family for generations. Rumor is the bank's trying to foreclose, claiming her husband took out loans she knew nothing about. Cassidy watched as the woman, red-faced and clearly distressed, stalked away from the banker. That's terrible. Can nothing be done to help her? Not much. Law tends to side with the banks in these matters. Ben frowned. Walsh has been sniffing around her property too. He's been buying up struggling ranches, piece by piece, building an empire, trying to. Ben helped her into the wagon. Come on, we've done what we came to do. The return journey was quieter, both of them lost in thought. Cassidy found herself studying Ben's profile as he drove, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, alert to any change in their surroundings. He was nothing like the refined gentleman she had imagined from the letters, yet there was something undeniably compelling about him. At the ranch, Ben immediately set to work on repairs to the corral fence. Cassidy, after changing into her newly purchased practical clothing, began an inventory of the cabin's supplies. The domestic routine established itself naturally, as though they had been sharing this space for years rather than a single day. When evening came, they sat on the porch, watching as the setting sun painted the landscape in golds and purples. The vastness of it still took Cassidy's breath away. It's beautiful, she murmured. It is. Ben's voice was soft. Worth fighting for. Is that why you came west? To find something worth fighting for, he considered her question. Partly, after the war, everything back east seemed confined, too many memories, too many ghosts. Out here, a man can breathe, can build something that's truly his own. I understand that desire. Cassidy pulled her shawl tighter as the evening breeze picked up. To create something that belongs to you, that can't be taken away. Is that why you agreed to marry a stranger? She smiled wryly. I agreed to marry the man in those letters, someone thoughtful, articulate, who shared my values and dreams. She shook her head. But he doesn't exist. I'm sorry for that. Don't be. The truth is always better than a comfortable lie, no matter how painful. She met his gaze. And now I have the chance to choose my own path forward, rather than following one laid out by someone else's deception. Ben nodded slowly. I admire that perspective. The days fell into a rhythm. Cassidy took charge of the cabin, transforming it with small touches that made it feel more like a home than merely a shelter. She started a kitchen garden, though the season was late, and began helping Ben with his accounts, which were a tangle of hasty notations and half-remembered transactions. Ben, for his part, seemed to appreciate her presence more than he had expected to. He worked from sunrise to sunset, as most ranchers did, but now returned to hot meals and someone to share the day's events with. Gradually, his initially gruff manner softened, and he began to reveal more of himself in their evening conversations. 2 weeks after Cassidy's arrival, they rode into town together for supplies. The visit to the mercantile was routine until Clara Wilson entered, her youngest child clinging to her skirts. "Mrs. Wilson," Ben greeted her. "How are you managing?" Clara's tired face brightened slightly at the kindness in his tone. "One day at a time, Mr. Nightingale. The bank's given me 30 days to find the money or they'll take the ranch." She glanced at Cassidy. "I don't believe we've met." "Cassidy Sullivan," she introduced herself. "I'm working for Mr. Nightingale, Clara Wilson." She smiled warmly despite her evident weariness. "You're not from around here, Boston, originally. Fancy that. I've always wanted to see Boston," Clara sighed. "Maybe someday if we have to start over somewhere." Ben frowned. "Has Walsh made another offer?" Clara's expression darkened. "Every week like clockwork." "Always less than the property's worth, but more than nothing, which is what I'll have if the bank takes it." She squeezed her son's shoulder. "I hate the thought of losing John's family land, but I have the children to consider." After Clara left with her modest purchases, Cassidy turned to Ben. "There must be something that can be done to help her. Unless someone can come up with $300 in the next 30 days, not much." Ben's frustration was evident. "Walsh probably arranged the whole thing, convinced the bank to call in loans that John Wilson might never have taken out in the first place. That's outrageous. That's business, according to men like Walsh." As they rode home, an idea began to form in Cassidy's mind. "Ben, what if we organized a benefit for Clara? A community gathering, a dance perhaps. People could contribute what they can afford. Sweetwater Creek isn't known for its charity." "Perhaps it should be." Cassidy's determination grew with each passing mile. "A community that doesn't support its own in times of need isn't really a community at all." Ben glanced at her, amusement mingling with admiration. "You haven't been here a month and already you're planning to reform the entire town." "Not reform. Remind," Cassidy smiled. "Everyone understands loss and hardship out here. Sometimes people just need an opportunity to show their better nature." To her surprise, Ben didn't dismiss the idea. "We could use the old meeting hall. Hasn't been much call for dances lately, but it's still sound." "Then you'll help." "I'll help." He adjusted his hat. "But don't be disappointed if it doesn't work out the way you hope." Cassidy spent the next week organizing the benefit. She rode into town daily, speaking with the women at the church, the shopkeepers, even the saloon owner who agreed to provide music through one of his piano players. Gradually, the resistance she initially encountered gave way to cautious support, and then to enthusiasm. "You've managed to get half the town involved," Ben remarked one evening as she reviewed her lists by lamplight. "Even old Hank Jenkins is bringing his fiddle, and he hasn't played in public since his wife died." "People want to help," Cassidy said. "They just needed a reason to come together." Ben watched her, a curious expression on his face. "You're good at this, bringing people together, making things happen." "I like creating order from chaos," she looked up from her notes. "It gives me purpose." "Is that what you're doing here, creating order from the chaos of your arrival?" The question caught her off guard. "Perhaps, though I think we've moved beyond that initial confusion, don't you?" "We have." Ben's gaze held hers for a long moment before he looked away. "Clara Wilson stopped by the ranch today while you were in town. She wanted to thank you for organizing the benefit, said no one's shown her such kindness since John died. It's not just me, everyone's contributing, but you're the catalyst." Ben smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his face and sent an unexpected flutter through Cassidy's chest. "You've been here less than a month, and already you're changing things." The night of the benefit arrived clear and mild. The meeting hall had been transformed with lanterns and wildflowers, tables laden with food contributed by families throughout the area. Ben had been right once engaged. The community had responded with surprising generosity. Cassidy wore her best dress, the one she had traveled west in, now carefully cleaned and pressed. As she stood at the entrance greeting arrivals, she felt a sense of accomplishment that transcended the evening's purpose. She was no longer just an outsider, a victim of deception. She was becoming part of this place in ways she hadn't anticipated. Ben appeared at her side, unusually formal in a clean shirt and vest. "Quite a turnout," he observed as wagons continued to arrive. "More than I expected," she admitted. "Have you seen Clara, just arriving with her children?" Ben nodded toward a wagon pulling up. "She seems overwhelmed already." Clara approached with tears in her eyes. "Miss Sullivan, I don't know how to thank you for this." "No thanks necessary," Cassidy assured her. "We're neighbors helping neighbors, that's all." The evening progressed better than anyone had dared hope. The collection box by the entrance filled steadily. People danced, ate, shared stories. For a few hours, the hardships of frontier life receded, replaced by community and connection. "Will you dance, Miss Sullivan?" Ben asked as the musicians struck up a lively tune. Cassidy hesitated. "I'm not sure I know the steps to these Western dances. Just follow my lead." He extended his hand. "I promise not to step on your toes, much." His hand was warm and calloused as it closed around hers. On the makeshift dance floor, Ben proved to be surprisingly graceful for a man who spent his days on horseback and mending fences. He guided her through the unfamiliar patterns with gentle pressure on her waist, his eyes never leaving hers. "You dance well for a rancher," she teased. "My mother insisted I learn, said it was the mark of a gentleman." A shadow of old grief crossed his face. "She died before I was 15, but some lessons stick. She would be proud of the man you've become." Ben's steps faltered momentarily and something vulnerable flickered in his eyes. "I'm not so sure about that." "I am." Cassidy spoke with quiet certainty. The music changed to a slower waltz and Ben drew her slightly closer, still maintaining a respectful distance. "And what about you, Cassidy Sullivan? What would your parents think of your adventure west?" "They would be terrified," she admitted with a small laugh. "But also proud, I think. They raised me to be independent, to think for myself. Even if this wasn't the outcome they would have chosen, they would respect my resilience." "Resilience," Ben repeated thoughtfully. "That's a good word for it. Most women would have crumbled finding out they'd been deceived the way you were." "I've had practice at starting over." Cassidy's voice softened. "After the fire, after losing everything, you learn what's truly important, and it isn't things or even places. It's finding purpose, connection." Ben's gaze intensified. "And have you found that here?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to address directly. Before Cassidy could respond, Sheriff Miller approached with a worried expression. "Ben, Miss Sullivan. Hate to interrupt, but there's a situation outside you should know about." They followed the sheriff to the entrance, where Raymond Walsh stood arguing with two of the town's merchants. He was clearly intoxicated, his usual polished appearance disheveled. "This is private property, Walsh," one of the merchants was saying. "You weren't invited." "It's a public gathering for a public cause," Walsh slurred, "and I've got as much right as anyone to be here." Ben stepped forward. "What do you want, Walsh?" Walsh's bleary gaze fixed on him, then shifted to Cassidy. "Came to see the happy couple, the mail-order bride and her cowboy," he laughed unpleasantly. "How's that working out for you, Miss Sullivan? Is he everything the letters promised?" "You're drunk, Walsh," Ben said flatly. "Go home before you embarrass yourself further." "Embarrass myself? That's rich coming from you, Nightingale." Walsh swayed slightly. "Everyone knows you couldn't keep a woman if your life depended on it. How long before this one figures out what happened to the last girl who made the mistake of trusting you?" Ben went very still. "That's enough." "Is it? Does she know about Sarah? Does she know what really happened at the river that day?" Ben's hands curled into fists. "I said that's enough." Cassidy placed a restraining hand on his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "Mr. Walsh, you're disrupting an event meant to help a widow and her children. Whatever grievance you have with Mr. Nightingale can be addressed another time." "So proper," Walsh sneered. "So righteous." "Just like Sarah was." Right up until before he could finish, Sheriff Miller stepped between them. "That's enough, Walsh. You're leaving, now." He gestured to two men nearby. "Escort Mr. Walsh back to town, gentlemen. Make sure he gets home without causing any more trouble." As Walsh was led away, still muttering, Cassidy turned to Ben. His face was like stone, his eyes fixed on some distant point. "Ben," she said softly, "I need some air." He walked away without looking at her, disappearing into the darkness beyond the lantern light. Sheriff Miller sighed heavily. "I'm sorry about that, Miss Sullivan. Walsh has a talent for finding people's raw spots." "Who is Sarah?" Cassidy asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. The sheriff hesitated. "That's Ben's story to tell if he chooses, not mine." He patted her shoulder awkwardly. "Give him some time. He'll come around." The rest of the evening passed in a blur for Cassidy. She maintained her hostess duties, but her mind was elsewhere, wondering about Ben and the pain that had been so evident in his eyes. He didn't return to the hall, and when it came time to count the money collected for Clara Wilson, Cassidy found herself doing it alone with the sheriff and Clara herself. $273, Sheriff Miller announced when they finished. "Not quite the full amount needed, but close." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "It's more than I ever dreamed possible. With what I've managed to save, we'll be able to pay the bank and keep our home." She hugged Cassidy fiercely. "How can I ever thank you?" "By thriving," Cassidy replied simply. "That's all the thanks any of us need." The ride back to the ranch was silent and tense. Ben drove the wagon with grim concentration. His earlier warmth completely vanished. Cassidy waited until they were halfway home before speaking. "Do you want to talk about it?" "No." The word was clipped, final. "All right." She respected his boundaries, though concern gnawed at her. Whatever Walsh had been referring to clearly cut deep. At the ranch, Ben unhitched the horses while Cassidy went inside to prepare for bed. When he didn't come in after an hour, she wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and ventured out to look for him. She found him sitting on a log by the creek, staring into the dark water. "May I join you?" she asked quietly. Ben didn't look up, but he nodded slightly. Cassidy sat beside him, giving him space but offering her presence. The night was cool, crickets chirping in the tall grass around them. "Sarah was my fiancée," Ben said finally, his voice low. "Before the war, we grew up together in Pennsylvania." Cassidy remained silent, sensing he needed to tell this story in his own way. "When I came back from the war, I was different, harder. The things I'd seen, the things I'd done, they changed me." He picked up a small stone and tossed it into the water. "Sarah tried to understand, but how could she? So I pushed her away, told her I didn't want her anymore, that I needed to make my own way west." "But she followed you," Ben nodded. 2 years after I settled here, just showed up one day, said she'd never stopped loving me, wanted another chance." His voice thickened. "I was so angry at first, but also relieved, like maybe I could have a piece of the life I'd given up." The pain in his voice made Cassidy want to reach for him, but she kept her hands folded in her lap. "We were supposed to marry that spring, but there was an accident." The creek flooded after heavy rains. Sarah was crossing the footbridge when it gave way. He swallowed hard. "I was only 100 yards away, working in the field. I heard her scream, but by the time I reached the creek, she was gone." "Oh, Ben," Cassidy's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry." Walsh was the one who found her body downstream near his property. He was the one who started the rumors that I'd been arguing with her, that maybe it wasn't an accident. Ben's hands clenched. "There was never any proof, nothing to investigate, but some people in town still wonder. And Walsh never lets me forget it. That's why he sent those letters in your name," Cassidy realized. "He wanted to bring a woman here to remind you of Sarah, to reopen that wound. Probably." Ben finally looked at her, his eyes shadowed with old grief. "I should have told you this sooner. You had a right to know what kind of situation you were walking into. You don't owe me your past, Ben." Cassidy hesitated, then gently placed her hand over his. "But I'm grateful you've shared it with me now." For a long moment, Ben stared at their hands. Then slowly he turned his palm upward, interlacing his fingers with hers. The simple connection felt more intimate than any words could have been. "The benefit tonight," he said after a while. "Clara will be able to keep her ranch, yes. Between the donations and what she'd saved, she has enough." "You did a good thing, Cassidy, a really good thing." "We did a good thing," she corrected gently. "All of us together." In that moment, something shifted between them, a deepening of understanding, of respect. They sat by the creek until the chill became too much to bear, hands linked. sharing the comfortable silence of people who no longer needed words to communicate. The next morning brought a return to routine, but with a new ease between them. Ben spoke more freely, sharing stories of his early days in Wyoming, his struggles and small triumphs. Cassidy, in turn, told him about her life in Boston, her dreams of someday opening a school of her own. A week after the benefit, Sheriff Miller rode out to the ranch with news. "Thought you'd want to know Raymond Walsh left town yesterday. Packed up and headed south, according to the stagecoach driver. For good?" Ben asked, skeptical. Who knows with Walsh? But rumor has it he's got gambling debts in Cheyenne that caught up with him. The sheriff smiled grimly. Seems he wasn't as clever with cards as he thought. After the sheriff departed, Ben found Cassidy in the garden. "Walsh is gone," she straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. "Do you think he'll come back? Eventually, perhaps. Men like Walsh always circle back to old hunting grounds." Ben studied her face. "Does that worry you?" "No." The realization surprised her. "This place, this life, it feels more mine now than anything that came before. I won't let someone like Walsh take that from me." Ben's expression softened. "You've changed since you arrived, for the better, I hope." "Definitely for the better." His smile was warm. "Though you were pretty remarkable to begin with." The compliment brought heat to her cheeks. "Thank you." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual that had become precious to both of them, Ben cleared his throat nervously. "I've been thinking," he began. "Your arrangement here was temporary. It's been nearly a month now." Cassidy's stomach tightened. Was he asking her to leave? "Yes. The school position the sheriff mentioned. I heard today that Mrs. Peterson is definitely leaving at the end of the month. The town council is looking for a replacement." He glanced at her. "If you're interested, I could put in a word." Oh, relief mingled with disappointment. Of course he was thinking of her future, of her independence. That was the kind of man he was. "That's very thoughtful. You'd be good at it. The children would benefit from your education." "Where would I live?" "In town." The thought of leaving the ranch, of not seeing Ben every day, created an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. "There's a small cabin behind the schoolhouse, part of the position." Ben stared out at the darkening landscape. "Or you could stay here, ride in each day, it's not too far." Cassidy studied his profile, trying to read his thoughts. "Which would you prefer?" Ben was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he turned to face her, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "I'd prefer you stayed," he admitted quietly. "These weeks with you here, they've been good, Cassidy, better than good." Her heart quickened. "For me too. But I don't want to hold you back. You came west for a new start, not to be tied to a struggling ranch and a man with a complicated past." "Ben," she waited until he met her eyes. "I came west believing in a future built on letters that proved false. What I found instead was something real, this place, this community, and you." Hope flickered in his eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'd like to stay, not as your employee, but as—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "As what?" Cassidy took a deep breath. "As a partner, in whatever way that might develop between us." Ben reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I can't offer you what those letters promised. I'm not a polished man with elegant words. I don't want elegant words. I want your word, honest and true, that I can give you." Ben moved closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Cassidy Sullivan, I can't promise you wealth or ease, but I can promise you this, my respect, my honesty, and if you'll have it, my heart." Tears pricked her eyes. "That's worth more than any letter of promise." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home, not to a place she had known before, but to a future she was only beginning to imagine. His arms around her were strong and certain, and in that embrace she found the answer to the question that had driven her west. Where did she belong? Here. With this man, on this land that had become as much a part of her as the dreams she carried. The school board accepted Cassidy's application with enthusiasm, impressed by her credentials and the warmth with which the townspeople had come to regard her. She began teaching in October, riding into town each morning and returning to the ranch each evening, where Ben always waited. They were married on a crisp November day, with Sheriff Miller officiating and Clara Wilson standing as Cassidy's witness. The ceremony was simple, the promises exchanged as elemental as the land around them, not flowery declarations, but solid vows to honor, to protect, to build together. "I never thought I'd find this again," Ben confessed that night as they lay together in the cabin that had truly become their home. Hope, purpose, love. Cassidy traced the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. Sometimes the best things come when we've stopped looking for them. Winter settled over the valley, transforming the landscape into a pristine wonderland of white. Inside their cabin, Ben and Cassidy created warmth that defied the season's chill, reading aloud by lamplight, planning spring plantings, dreaming of the larger house they would build on the south-facing slope. In December, a letter arrived from Boston, a response to one Cassidy had sent weeks earlier, explaining her circumstances to her father's former colleague. The older professor expressed relief at hearing she was safe and well. He also enclosed a legal document, the final settlement of her parents' estate. The debts had been resolved, and a small inheritance previously entangled in litigation was now hers. "It's not a fortune," she told Ben that evening, "but it's enough to make a difference for us. We could expand the herd or start building the new house sooner." Ben studied her with wonder. "You continue to surprise me, Cassidy Nightingale." She smiled at the sound of her new name. "Is that a good thing, the best thing?" He pulled her into his arms. "When you arrived with that letter, I thought you were bringing complications I didn't need. I couldn't have known you were bringing everything I'd never dared hope for." Spring came early that year. As the snow retreated, revealing the first tender shoots of green, Cassidy stood on the porch of their cabin, one hand resting lightly on her still flat stomach. Soon, she would tell Ben about the child growing within her, a new life, a new beginning. She watched as he worked in the distance, mending winter damage to the corral. This was not the life the false letters had promised her, but something far more valuable, a life built on truth, on mutual respect, on love that had grown naturally between two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. When Ben looked up and saw her watching, he raised his hand in greeting, a smile spreading across his face. Cassidy waved back, her heart full. The promise that had brought her west had been broken, but in its place, she had found a man whose word was unbreakable, and that had made all the difference.